is another kind of mate on the board called stalemate. Stalemate is what happens when your king is not in check, but you also have no other legal move on the board. And when this happens, it's a draw, and nobody wins. You might be absolutely winning your game and about to checkmate the opponent's king, but if you fall into stalemate, it's a draw. This is best explained with some examples. In this position with white to move, the game would be a stalemate, because white's only piece, the king, does not have any legal squares to move to, and white is not in check. In this position, let's say white plays queen to c2. The queen gets one square closer to the king, but notice black's king is not in check and black does not have a legal move in this position. The position is a stalemate. Remember, in chess, you're never forced to make an illegal move, so black cannot put the king onto a square where it would be captured. In this position, can you find a better move for white? White can actually win the game in just one move after queen b2 checkmate. Remember, your opponent can never be in stalemate if they are in check. In this position, black looks doomed. The king is trapped in the corner. White is ready to deliver checkmate on the next move, and black is down lots of material. However, chess is a game of many opportunities, and even when things look really bad, you might have the chance to save the game, or at least draw. Notice that since black's king does not have any legal moves, if black's queen disappeared from the board, it would be a stalemate if it were black to move. In this position, can you find a way to make black's queen disappear and create a stalemate? If you found queen takes h2 check, great job. White must deal with the check, and the only way to get out of the check is to capture the black queen. Now the only remaining piece is the black king, and since black's king does not have any legal squares, and black is not in check, the game is a stalemate. What a save by black. Let's take a look at this position. If white played the move queen to c7, it's not a very wise move because white, first of all, could have won the game immediately with queen to b7 checkmate, but also queen to c7 traps black's king. But does that mean it's a stalemate? Not in this position, because notice black has another piece. Black could play the move h3, allowing white to correct the mistake from the last move and deliver checkmate with queen to b7. Notice if we added another pawn, just this pawn on h3, the position would now be a stalemate with black to move. Now that you've learned about stalemate, remember to stay alert and avoid it when you're winning, and when you're losing, keep your eyes open for the opportunity to save the game with stalemate. Stalemate is just one of the possible ways to end the game in a tie. Another way is to simply agree to a draw. This might happen if neither player can see a way to victory. One person offers the draw, and the other can accept or decline. Another way to get a draw is if the exact same position is repeated 3 times. After 3 repetitions, either player can claim a draw when it is their turn to move. Or, if you're playing online, a draw will automatically be called after 5 repetitions. Another way to draw is if neither player has enough pieces to checkmate, like lone king versus lone king. You'll learn more about this later. Finally, you can also draw if 50 pairs of moves have been played on the board without any captures or pawn moves. This keeps you from dying of boredom as you and your opponent move your rooks back and forth forever. Now it's your turn to practice drawn positions. One of the most unusual rules of chess is called castling. This move was invented to speed up the game and do 2 things at once. When you castle, your king moves toward the safety of the corner and your rook comes toward the action in the middle. You literally are moving 2 pieces at once, but it counts as just one move. You can castle in either direction, left or right. In either case, your king moves over only 2 squares, and then the rook from that side is moved directly to the other side of the king, like this. And here's another example of castling. Let's say you're playing a game right here on chess.com. Here are 2 ways you can make the castling move. The first option is to drag the king to the square where it will castle, and then the rook will automatically move, like this. Another option is to click the square the king is currently on, in this case, e8, and then the square where you will move the king, g8. So we click e8, followed by g8, and now we're castled. Castling is a great move with many benefits if it is used at the right time. However, there are a few conditions that may prevent you from castling. First off, you cannot castle when you are in check. You must first deal with the check before trying to castle. Secondly, you cannot castle if your king would castle through a check, or after castling, your king would land into a check. Next, you cannot castle if there are any pieces in between your king and your rook. It must be completely empty. In this position, both white and black have to move one piece before they're able to castle. After knight f3 and bishop c5, for example, both sides are now able to castle kingside. Finally, you cannot castle if your king has made any other move before, or if the rook you are castling with has already moved. It must be the first move for both pieces. In this position, the only legal castling move is for black. Since white's king has already moved, white cannot castle. Notice black can only castle with the rook on h8 because the other rook has already moved. What is the notation for castling? It depends on if you castle kingside or queenside. In this position, let's say white castles kingside. The way you would write it is 0-0. If black now castles queenside, we would add one more 0. So it would be 0-0-0. One way that can help you remember this is notice on the king side there are two squares between the white king and the rook. Notice 0-0 has two zeros. So kingside castling, two squares, two zeros. Notice on the queen side there's three squares between the king and the rook. Queenside castling has three zeros, 0-0-0. Now that you've learned this powerful move, it's time to practice castling. The last weird rule in chess is called en passant, which is French for in passing. This rule was introduced at the same time pawns were allowed to move two squares on their first move. When that happened, sometimes pawns would move past other pawns without giving the other pawn an opportunity to capture, which didn't seem fair. So en passant was invented. Pay attention, it's tricky. If your opponent's pawn moves forward two squares, which it can only do if it is that pawn's first move, and it lands directly next to one of your pawns, then on your next turn, and that turn only, you have the opportunity to capture that pawn as if it had only moved one square, like this. Let's take a look at that again. If a pawn is moved forward two squares and lands next to another pawn, that pawn can capture the first pawn on its very next move. You move behind the pawn as if it had moved only one square and capture it, placing it off the board. You might get some weird looks if you do this move in a game with someone who doesn't know, but it's an important rule of chess. Now that you've learned en passant, let's have you try it.